For more than 30 years, Johnny Carson welcomed America's biggest stars into millions of living rooms each night. With his calm voice and easy laughter, Carson created a space that felt safe, familiar, and completely under control. But what happens when we watch those same interviews today? There's something unsettling about seeing these moments now. As a former Tonight Show producer once admitted, what felt harmless then no longer does. We're watching talented, relaxed guests, unaware that their lives would later end in accidents, violence, or circumstances that still raise questions decades later. The contrast is haunting. The carefully lit safety of Carson's stage stands in sharp opposition to what followed outside the studio. How many of these guests walked off that stage for the last time without knowing it? And how often did television's safest space become the final calm before chaos? In the next few minutes, we'll explore 7 Johnny Carson guests whose lives took troubling turns after the applause faded, beginning with a woman who appeared on the show more than 100 times and whose final moments on a quiet Mexican beach remain deeply unresolved. Carol Wayne, the woman who never came back. To millions of Tonight Show viewers in the 1970s and early 1980s, Carol Wayne was instantly recognizable. She appeared more than 100 times as the breathless, wide-eyed matinee lady in Johnny Carson's Art Fern sketches, playing exaggerated innocence so convincingly that audiences often couldn't tell where the character ended and the real person began. Her chemistry with Carson felt effortless. Wayne wasn't just a recurring joke, she had genuine comic timing, turning confusion into charm and hesitation into laughter. On camera, everything appeared light, playful, and safe. Off camera, her life told a very different story. Friends later described mounting financial pressure, unstable relationships, and a growing reliance on substances. Those struggles intensified in the early 1980s when The Tonight Show was shortened from 90 minutes to 60. The tea time movie sketches were eliminated, taking with them Wayne's primary source of income and her most consistent connection to the show that had defined her career. In January 1985, 3 years after her final appearance beside Carson, Wayne traveled to the Mexican resort town of Manzanillo with a companion named Edward Durst. According to Durst, the two argued on January 10. He said Wayne left their hotel room to take a walk along the beach. She left behind her passport, she left behind her belongings, and she never returned. 3 days later, local fishermen discovered Wayne's body floating in the shallow waters of Santiago Bay, less than 40 feet from the hotel. The sea was calm, the distance was short. For a healthy adult, drowning in calm, shallow water is uncommon. And Wayne, according to those who knew her, was afraid of the ocean and not comfortable swimming in open water. The official conclusion described the death as an accident. No full examination was conducted, and the local investigation moved quickly toward closure. To many researchers, the circumstances raised immediate red flags. Then there was Edward Durst. After filing a missing person report, he left Mexico before Wayne was even found. In an unsettling coincidence, he had also been present at another widely publicized death involving a well-known figure more than a decade earlier. Was this simply a tragic chain of chance events? Or did the rush to move on leave critical questions unanswered? What makes Carol Wayne's story especially haunting is the contrast. The woman who brought laughter to millions through exaggerated innocence vanished in a place that should have felt safe, leaving behind a mystery that, decades later, still refuses to settle. Bob Crane, the life no one was supposed to see. When Bob Crane sat on Johnny Carson's couch in the 1960s and early 1970s, audiences saw a man at the absolute height of his fame. As the star of Hogan's Heroes, Crane embodied a reassuring version of the American leading man, clever, charming, and effortlessly likable, someone viewers felt they could trust without question. On television, he appeared completely transparent and familiar, the kind of celebrity who felt safe to welcome into the home week after week, as if there were nothing hidden beneath the surface. What no one could see was how carefully that image had been constructed. Behind the scenes, Crane lived a private life that stood in sharp contrast to his public persona, a world shaped by secrecy, control, and obsession. It was a life he kept rigidly separated from the man audiences believed they knew, maintaining two identities that rarely intersected. For years, that division held, until it didn't. That hidden world came violently into focus on the 29th of June 1978, when Crane was found dead in his apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. The scene revealed extreme violence, and investigators quickly realized this was not a case with simple answers. What made the moment even more unsettling was how ordinary everything had seemed just hours earlier. The night before he was found, Crane had performed as usual in a dinner theater production in Phoenix. Colleagues recalled nothing unusual. He finished the show, spoke casually with those around him, and returned to his apartment, still living the routine life of a working actor. There were no signs of retreat, no indication that he believed anything was about to change. How does someone move from applause to silence in less than 24 hours? As investigators searched for answers, attention turned to Crane's close friend John Henry Carpenter, a regional sales manager for Sony who had introduced him to early video recording technology. Together, the two had extensively documented Crane's private encounters, creating an archive that stunned investigators and permanently altered how the public understood who Crane really was. This discovery reframed the entire case, transforming it from a straightforward investigation into something far more complex, one entangled with secrecy, trust, and a carefully protected double life. The suspected weapon was never recovered, though investigators believed it may have been a camera tripod, a grimly symbolic object given Crane's fixation on recording his private world. The absence of that single piece of evidence would become one of the case's greatest voids, a missing fragment that prevented the investigation from ever fully closing. Evidence appeared to point toward Carpenter, including traces connected to Crane's rare blood type found in a rental car, but the case was plagued by limitations. Forensic technology at the time was primitive, and early missteps weakened the investigation long before it reached a courtroom. 16 years later, in 1994, Carpenter was finally brought to trial. He was acquitted and maintained his innocence until his death in 1998, leaving behind a case filled with evidence, suspicion, and unresolved doubt. Was this a situation where the truth simply arrived too early for the science meant to uncover it, or did the carefully maintained image of a beloved television star complicate the search for clarity from the very beginning? The mystery surrounding Bob Crane's death refused to fade. Over time, it inspired books, documentaries, and even a feature film autofocus underscoring how deeply this story embedded itself into popular culture. What makes Crane's story especially unsettling is how completely it rewrote his legacy. Before his death, he was remembered as a successful sitcom star. Afterward, his name became inseparable from the secrets he tried to hide, and from a case that, decades later, still refuses to offer a final answer. Sam Cooke, a voice silenced too soon. When Sam Cooke appeared on The Tonight Show on the 7th of February 1964, he was not simply another musical guest passing through Johnny Carson's stage. He was an artist standing at a crossroads. That night, Cooke performed A Change Is Gonna Come, a song that marked a decisive shift in his career, away from polished, crossover hits and toward music shaped by lived experience, quiet resistance, and social awareness. The performance captured a moment of transformation, not just for Cooke, but for American popular music itself. Yet, in a bitter irony, that historic appearance would later vanish when NBC taped over the episode, erasing what should have been a preserved cultural milestone. At the time, Cooke was evolving at a remarkable pace. He had begun asserting unprecedented control over his work by founding his own record label and publishing company, positioning himself not only as a performer, but as a businessman and an emerging figure of influence. He was also becoming more outspoken about segregation and discriminatory practices, refusing to accept limitations imposed on where he could perform or who could attend his shows. His appearance on Carson's stage captured him at the precise moment when artistic ambition, economic independence, and social consciousness converged. It was a moment filled with possibility, and it would be short-lived. Just 10 months later, on the 11th of December 1964, Cooke's life ended under circumstances that immediately raised questions. According to the official account, Cooke had checked into a Los Angeles motel with a woman named Eliza Boyer. Events escalated rapidly, culminating in a confrontation with the motel's manager, Bertha Franklin, who later stated that she acted in response to a perceived threat. Authorities accepted this explanation with striking speed. The formal inquiry lasted roughly 30 minutes and relied almost entirely on testimony from Boyer and Franklin, with little effort made to reconcile conflicting details or explore alternative interpretations. As scrutiny increased, inconsistencies became harder to dismiss. Observers noted physical signs that appeared difficult to reconcile with the brief struggle described in official statements. Crucial testimony came from individuals whose accounts were treated as definitive, yet their credibility would soon come under question. Just days after Cooke's death, Elisa Boyer was arrested on an unrelated charge, a development that fueled further doubts about the reliability of her testimony, doubts that were never meaningfully addressed. No extensive forensic reconstruction followed, and fundamental contradictions were left unresolved. How could a case involving one of the most influential artists of the era be closed so quickly? And why were so many obvious questions never pursued? To understand why Cooke's case continues to trouble historians and researchers, it must be viewed within its broader historical context. At the time of his death, Cooke was not only a chart-topping entertainer, but a black artist gaining economic autonomy and challenging entrenched power structures during a volatile period in American history. His growing independence, combined with his increasing willingness to confront injustice, positioned him as a figure whose influence extended far beyond music. Seen through that lens, the speed with which the case was concluded feels less like resolution and more like disappearance. Today, Cooke's appearance on Carson's show exists almost as a ghost, a lost recording of a man in transition, captured just before everything stopped. His voice, filled with hope and restrained urgency, hinted at a future that never arrived. And the unanswered questions surrounding his final night remain embedded in American cultural memory, not because they are sensational, but because they were never truly examined. Natalie Wood, Death on Dark Water. When Natalie Wood appeared on The Tonight Show throughout the 1970s, audiences were watching more than a movie star. They were watching a living chapter of Hollywood history. Wood had grown up in front of the camera, surviving one of the industry's most perilous journeys, the transition from beloved child performer to respected adult actress. On Carson's couch, she projected composure, intelligence, and a quiet authority shaped by decades inside a demanding system. Nothing in those relaxed conversations hinted that her life would later be reduced to timelines, contradictions, and unanswered questions. The basic facts of Wood's final night are well documented, even if their meaning remains disputed. On the 28th of November 1981, she was aboard the yacht Splendor near California's Catalina Island with her husband Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain Dennis Davern. Sometime during the night, Wood ended up in the water. Her body was discovered the following morning. The initial conclusion described the incident as accidental, suggesting she may have slipped while attempting to board a small dinghy, possibly after an argument. The fact that she was wearing a down jacket was cited as evidence that she had not intended to enter the water. Crucially, however, no one aboard the yacht could say with certainty how or when Wood went overboard. There were no direct witnesses to the moment itself. From the outset, this explanation left lingering doubts. Wood was widely known to fear dark water, a fear rooted in childhood and reinforced throughout her life. Those closest to her struggled to accept that she would voluntarily leave the safety of the yacht alone at night under such conditions. Adding to the uncertainty, witnesses on nearby boats later reported hearing a woman calling for help around midnight, a detail that conflicted with the timeline initially provided by those on the Splendor. If those cries were Wood's, why were they not acted upon immediately? And how did such a critical detail fail to reshape the early conclusions? For nearly 3 decades, the case remained officially closed, yet the questions never disappeared. In 2011, authorities reopened the investigation following new information from multiple sources, including Captain Davern. In his revised account, Davern described a heated argument between Wood and Wagner on the night she disappeared and claimed that efforts to search for her were delayed. What troubled observers was not only the content of these statements, but their timing. Why had these details emerged only after so many years of silence? What had changed, and what had prevented these claims from surfacing earlier? The investigation took another notable turn in 2018, when the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department named Robert Wagner a person of interest, citing inconsistencies in his statements and his refusal to cooperate with further questioning after the case was reopened. While this fell short of an accusation, it marked a clear shift in the official stance. What makes Wood's death so enduringly compelling is not a single piece of evidence, but the convergence of intimate relationships, an isolated setting, and a moment that no one can fully account for. On a confined yacht, among people who knew each other well, the absence of certainty became the case's defining feature. Today, Wood's appearances on Carson's show carry a haunting weight. Viewers see a woman who had mastered Hollywood's illusions, unaware that her own life would later be dissected through fragments and conflicting memories. Her story endures not because of spectacle, but because clarity remains elusive, a reminder that even in the most glamorous worlds, some truths never fully surface. Dorothy Kilgallen, the reporter who knew too much. When Dorothy Kilgallen appeared on The Tonight Show during Johnny Carson's early years, she brought a gravity few guests could match. Kilgallen was not a performer offering anecdotes, but a nationally syndicated columnist, a celebrated radio host, and a long-standing panelist on What's My Line. Her presence on Carson's couch carried authority. By the mid-1960s, her Voice of Broadway column reached millions of readers, and her reputation rested on precision, access, and an uncommon willingness to challenge official narratives. Viewers saw a confident journalist at the height of her influence, unaware that she was already deep into what would become her final and most controversial investigation. At the time of her Carson appearances, Kilgallen was privately pursuing information related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, an inquiry that had led her to question the conclusions of the official report. She told friends and colleagues that she possessed material capable of reshaping public understanding of the case, including details from a private interview with Jack Ruby. This context gives her sudden death on the 8th of November 1965 an immediate and unsettling weight. Kilgallen was found in a bedroom she never used, fully dressed in clothes she had worn the previous day, seated upright with reading glasses on and an open book nearby, a scene that struck those who knew her routines as profoundly inconsistent. Despite these unusual circumstances, the official conclusion was reached quickly, attributing her passing to a combination of substances. That determination satisfied procedural requirements, but left critical questions unanswered. Kilgallen had no documented history of misuse, and friends noted nothing in her recent behavior that suggested distress or retreat. More troubling were the procedural irregularities that followed. No full examination was conducted. Key samples were later destroyed. Errors appeared on official documents. Each individual anomaly might have been explained away, but together they formed a pattern that resisted easy dismissal. What transformed suspicion into lasting unease was what happened next. Immediately following Kilgallen's death, the extensive files she had compiled on the Kennedy case vanished. According to those closest to her, these materials were meticulously organized, kept separate from her other work, and stored securely. They were never recovered. How could a journalist known for her discipline lose the very documents she had guarded most closely? And who would have benefited from their disappearance? Kilgallen's story represents a distinct kind of American mystery, not merely the loss of a life, but the loss of information. Unlike other cases marked by visible chaos, hers unfolded quietly, through omissions, procedural shortcuts, and unanswered gaps. Her appearances on Carson's show now feel charged with hindsight, moments when a journalist spoke freely on national television while carrying knowledge she believed could change history. Whether that knowledge was ever fully realized may never be known. What remains is the enduring question of how much truth can disappear without leaving a trace. Peter Ivers, the new wave visionary silenced. When Peter Ivers appeared on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, he represented something unusual on Johnny Carson's carefully curated stage. Ivers was not a conventional pop star or mainstream entertainer. He was a Bridge, a Harvard-educated musician, visual artist, and host of the cult television series New Wave Theater, a program that quietly smuggled underground culture into American living rooms. Through Ivers, suburban audiences were introduced to artists and bands that traditional network television considered too strange, too loud, or too dangerous. His presence on Carson's couch symbolized a rare moment when the avant-garde brushed against the mainstream. What made Ivers distinctive was not just his taste, but his role as a cultural translator. On New Wave Theater, he presented acts like Dead Kennedys and Fear, with an understated calm that made the unfamiliar feel approachable. He understood how to make radical art legible without dulling its edge. This ability to move comfortably between worlds makes the circumstances of his death on the 3rd of March 1983 especially disturbing. Ivers was found in his Los Angeles apartment, the victim of extreme violence. There were no signs of forced entry, a detail that immediately suggested he may have known the person who ended his life. The shock was amplified by how completely the act contrasted with Ivers's personality. Friends and collaborators described him as gentle, intellectually curious, and largely removed from the kinds of conflicts that typically precede such brutality. The intensity of the scene led some investigators to speculate about motives ranging from personal disputes to connections with the wider social environment surrounding the early punk and new wave scenes. Yet speculation quickly replaced clarity, not because evidence was lacking, but because it was mishandled. From the moment authorities arrived, the investigation unraveled. Friends who discovered Ivers's body were allowed to move freely through the apartment. The scene was not properly secured, basic protocols were ignored. Potential evidence was compromised before it could be examined. Fingerprints were never systematically collected. The prevailing attitude treated the case as routine, just another incident in a neighborhood already stigmatized, rather than as the targeted killing of a significant cultural figure. In effect, the opportunity to understand what truly happened began slipping away almost immediately. Over the decades, theories multiplied as answers faded. Some pointed to the overlap between experimental art, nightlife, and substances that characterized parts of the era. Others suggested personal relationships or professional tensions that never surfaced publicly. But what makes Ivers's case particularly haunting is not the abundance of theories, it is the sense that the truth may have been reachable. Unlike mysteries shaped by isolation or lack of witnesses, this was a crime that occurred in a private residence, likely involving someone known to the victim, and in circumstances that should have left recoverable traces. The failure was not in the complexity of the puzzle, but in the handling of its pieces. Today, Ivers's appearance on Carson's show feels like a frozen moment before erasure. Viewers see a thoughtful figure calmly navigating a mainstream platform, unaware that his life would soon be defined not by his role as a cultural connector, but by unanswered questions. His story stands as a reminder that when attention fades and urgency disappears, even solvable truths can vanish not because they are hidden, but because no one insisted on finding them. David Carradine, The Death in a Bangkok Hotel. When David Carradine appeared on The Tonight Show during the 1970s, he embodied a form of stardom that felt unusually restrained. Best known for his role as the wandering Shaolin monk in Kung Fu, Carradine projected discipline, introspection, and a fascination with Eastern philosophy that set him apart from Hollywood's louder personalities. On Johnny Carson's couch, he spoke calmly about balance, martial arts, and spiritual curiosity, presenting himself as a seeker rather than a celebrity. That carefully cultivated image would later clash sharply with the circumstances of his final days, creating an immediate and unsettling sense of contradiction. On the 3rd of June 2009, Carradine was found in his hotel room in Bangkok, where he had been staying while working on a film project. The initial explanation offered by authorities described a deeply private and tragic scenario, one that immediately created cognitive dissonance for the public. The man long associated with restraint, philosophy, and self-control was suddenly linked to circumstances that seemed to contradict everything audiences believed they knew about him. As details emerged, shock gave way to confusion, and confusion quickly turned into unanswered questions. Among the most troubling aspects were specific physical details at the scene that raised doubts about how events could have unfolded. Certain elements suggested complexities that were difficult to reconcile with a simple explanation, prompting questions about what would have been physically possible without assistance. These details, while never fully explored publicly, became central to the unease surrounding the case. From the outset, the mystery was shaped not by a lack of information, but by information that resisted easy interpretation. Carradine's family, particularly his brother Keith Carradine, publicly voiced concern and called for a more thorough review. They pointed to inconsistencies and urged authorities to look more closely at the circumstances, emphasizing that important questions remained unresolved. These concerns gained further attention when reports surfaced that Carradine had recently been researching criminal activity in Thailand for a potential future project, a pursuit that may have placed him in unfamiliar or unpredictable environments. While no direct connection was ever established, the context added another layer of uncertainty. Despite these doubts, local authorities ultimately maintained their original conclusion, stating that there was no evidence of third-party involvement. Independent experts later offered differing interpretations, but none had full access to the original evidence. What made the case especially difficult to assess was the setting itself. The investigation took place in a foreign jurisdiction under different investigative standards, limiting transparency and outside review. Once key decisions were made, the opportunity for deeper scrutiny quietly closed. Over time, Carradine's death settled into a category of mystery defined less by definitive answers than by unresolved contradictions. Was this simply a convergence of private behavior and circumstance, or were critical elements never fully examined? Without independent access to the full record, certainty remained out of reach. Like several other figures who once sat across from Johnny Carson, Carradine became part of a pattern where the absence of clarity proved more enduring than any official conclusion. Looking back at his appearances on The Tonight Show, viewers now see a man presenting calm and control, unaware that his life would end amid confusion thousands of miles from home. His story stands as a reminder that public identity can obscure private complexity, and that when investigations leave gaps, those gaps often become permanent. In Carradine's case, what lingers is not a single theory, but the quiet discomfort of never truly knowing what happened. For more than 3 decades, Johnny Carson's stage represented comfort, control, and familiarity. Under the studio lights, his guests appeared relaxed, witty, and fully in command of their lives. Yet the stories we've revisited reveal a darker contrast, one that only becomes visible in hindsight. These 7 individuals were captured at moments of confidence and success, unaware that their lives would later be defined not only by their achievements, but by questions that would never be fully resolved. From Carol Wayne's unexplained end, Far From Home, to Bob Crane's private world colliding violently with his public image, from Sam Cooke's voice rising at the very moment it was silenced, to Natalie Wood's final night on dark water, each case exposes the fragile boundary between celebrity and vulnerability. Dorothy Kilgallen's disappearance reminds us how information itself can vanish, while Peter Ivers' story shows how truth can be lost not through secrecy, but through neglect. And David Carradine's final chapter underscores how public identity often conceals private complexity, especially when investigations leave gaps that can never be closed. What connects these stories is not conspiracy, but contrast. The controlled environment of Carson's stage versus the disorder that followed. The illusion of clarity versus the persistence of doubt. Fame did not protect these individuals. In many cases, it complicated the search for answers. Investigations moved too quickly, too quietly, or not thoroughly enough. Key moments passed without witnesses. Critical details disappeared, and with time, uncertainty hardened into permanence. Watching these Carson interviews today feels different. What once seemed like light entertainment now carries a haunting undertone. Are we seeing subtle clues that never meant anything, or are we projecting meaning onto moments that were always ordinary? How much of what we believe about these cases is shaped by what was never asked, never pursued, or never preserved? Perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: mysteries endure not because answers are impossible, but because opportunities were missed. In the space between fame and silence, certainty slipped away, and all that remains are fragments, interviews, timelines, memories, inviting each generation to look again and wonder what might still be hidden in plain sight. If these stories left you questioning what you thought you knew, you're not alone. Let us know which case continues to trouble you the most and why. Because sometimes the most revealing stories are not the ones that end clearly, but the ones that refuse to end at all.